Seth, that ad that you had was really great. The best thing about listening to podcasts is when they talk about, we came back from break. We had a really interesting conversation during that break. And you're always like, why are their best conversations always when they're not there? Yeah. You want that recognition though, right?
Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, welcome to another E9 podcast.
We have a guest.
Yeah, we have a guest. His name's Andrew Lutrull. Andrew's a friend of ours. Andrew teaches art to a bunch of 10, 11, and 12-year-olds.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead
do you want me
and
to
answer
that
first.
question? How do I do that? There's definitely a lot of energy in the room, so it's trying to harness that energy. And once you get that kind of age group kids on board, they're pretty willing to do all kinds of things. But if they're not on board, then it's a real struggle.
So it's just the task of winning them over every day.
That's a big task, yeah.
Okay.
And once they're won over, then it's kind of like, hey, let's explore our imaginations and let's try to grow those, because a lot of kids at that age think that their imagination is done or they've lost it or something. So that's the struggle. It's like, no, you do have an imagination. It's just you need to practice it.
Like, do they basically I don't play with dolls anymore, so I must not have an imagination or something? Or
yeah, or I realize that my drawings aren't any good. And so I'm critical now of what I do, where I used to just do it without thinking about it.
So, Andrew, what involvement have you had in your own, with the Enneagram so far?
Yeah, so my wife was told about it through a friend maybe or somehow, and she was like, this is amazing. And so she's like, hey, you should read about this. And so that's kind of where I started. And nothing really jumped out to me like it did to her. Mm-hmm. So it was obvious that for her, this is locked in for her. And it kind of helped her understand herself, I think, and the world. And so she was really keen on me kind of having this realization as well. And I kind of read a little bit about it and went, some of these things sound like me, but I'm just not really sure.
Okay.
And then I ended up hearing a lecture series about it, which was really interesting. And some things did really jump out, and I'm like, wow, this is like this guy speaking to me. But yeah, so I'm just kind of there. I've heard some things. I understand some aspects of it, but I don't know that much.
Okay. And we just had Andrew take a particular test that I like to use. If you Google Enneagram short test, you'll find a downloadable PDF. And it's not the kind of test that's going to tell you exactly what you are. So we're not working with anything that said, hey, Andrew, you're definitely this type or that type. It narrows it down to 3 or 4 so that you can just kind of get the conversation started. And so especially if you're working with someone who knows the Enneagram well, it's a great way to kind of get started to figure out what you are. So we've had Andrew do that.
It helps us avoid, the first 1 to 2 hours of conversation, which if you've listened to, any of our previous episodes, that's what we're avoiding repeating.
Yeah, you want to avoid 1 to 2 hours of conversation with us. Yeah. It's nice to have someone else here who can laugh at the stuff we say.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize the bonus of having a guest. That they will actually laugh at the stuff we say. They will, instead of letting it just kind of float awkwardly out into the ether.
They will cue the audience that these awkward dudes are trying to be funny.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Yeah.
You could just get a laugh track, and then you would never have to have a guest.
Oh my gosh!
You guys could just talk.
As a 5, that's like the perfect solution. Like, we actually don't need anybody. We just need a laugh track to cue people in.
I feel like my life could use a laugh track.
Uh-huh.
Yep. It would get me through a lot of situations
like,
when I totally bomb. Like
every awkward joke that the five makes, if they just had a laugh track to cue people in that this is actually a joke and not just general awkwardness.
Because then most people would laugh politely, even if it's not funny. They'll just be like, ah, ha, ha, ha.
Oh, brilliant.
Release the tension.
So, anyway, Andrew's scores on the test came out as he scored highly with the 9 statement, and the 3 statement, and the 7 statement. And you had already kind of latched on to the 9 and the 3 before. So can you tell me, like, what is it, particularly those 2, that seem to resound with you?
With the 3, it's probably more who I am and didn't realize. Maybe like growing up, I definitely feel very task-based, achieving things. And feeling like a sense of accomplishment and like, these are the things I need to do. I'm going to set out, I'm going to do those things, and then I'm going to feel good about it. And then I think when I heard the way a 9 was described, it was like, maybe this is more a person that I was almost trying to be or was wanting to be, maybe. Or maybe there's like a bit of both of me in that. And so some of the things about like this internal conversation of the things that the number 9 kind of describes, it's like, yeah, that feels like what's going on inside my head, maybe. And maybe more recently than like as an adult rather than growing up.
So you feel like the 3 was maybe more growing up and the 9 is maybe more now?
Yeah, possibly.
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Possibly. Or also maybe the kind of aspects, and I don't know it that well, but from what I'd heard, like maybe I would be more of a 3 compulsively in like a kind of an internal struggle of like wanting more. The things that appeal to me are things that are described in a 9.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
One of the interesting things that we'll end up exploring more eventually is how the 3 and the 9 are intimately connected with each other, and they're related to the 6. And so it's not surprising at all that if you resonate with one of those, you'd have some kind of relationship with another of the 3.
Yeah, definitely.
So it doesn't mean that you're definitely one of those things, but if you are, this pattern kind of makes a lot of sense. It'll be more to explore.
Those 2 are what you scored highest on. I'm also interested. Do you remember reading like the 7 statement? Okay.
I don't think I know anything about the 7 other than what I read on that short test. Kind of went, that kind of sounds.
Do we want to give them a short and quick idea of what a 7 is?
Yeah. Okay. So you probably have at least one friend who's like this. And that friend is maybe a little unreliable when it comes to plans, but will throw the best parties. Like, if you need to have a good time, that's the friend to go to. But if you need to count on someone to have like a hard conversation with, they might bail on you, right? Not that they will necessarily, but 7s have this dynamic where they pursue happiness and pleasure almost compulsively, but for good reasons. It's not all a bad thing. They know how to help people relax and enjoy themselves, and they expect you to, and they want you to with them. They invite you into that space where it's okay to do that. Also, the dark side of it is that they're at times doing that to avoid thinking about the hard stuff.
Any that resound with you?
It sounds like that's something that kind of like, oh, that sounds sort of attractive from the outside. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, that doesn't sound like me, but I can. You're like, oh, I can see that in other people, and like, oh yeah, that sounds.
And
like
they're a lot of fun to be around.
Right.
Let me ask you this: do you always have a plan A plan B and maybe even a plan C for how to have a good time at all times?
Huh. No.
Okay.
Speaking of creativity, like we were earlier,
Yeah.
sevens are they don't only plan that way, they kind of do everything that way. They're great brainstormers.
Huh.
They're not great with follow through, but if you need to like come up with a million ideas for something,
Yeah.
sevens they're like popcorn, man.
Yeah, gotcha.
They call it monkey brain. They tend to jump from one thing to another very quickly and make associations that most people don't make because they're so used to just doing this kind of back and forth jumping and relating everything going on.
I thought it was because their minds were like monkey bread. It's all sweet and it's a bunch of stuff piled together.
It's a sticky.
It's a party.
Yeah.
It's got to be the most party bread.
That might
of all the bread.
Yes.
The most party bread of all the bread.
So, yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. This is. Do we want to pursue this sub conversation about the most party of all breads? What comes in? I want to.
I mean, banana bread's in there.
What comes in second? Banana bread is definitely. It's definitely very party bread. It's down for a good time. I mean, you've introduced fruit into a bread, and I think that always makes it a little bit more of a party.
True.
Even though it's a fairly starchy fruit. Yeah. Yeah, I think we can probably cross 7 off the list.
Yeah, that doesn't necessarily sound like
I've seen you in your work environment, and I have trouble seeing a 7 surviving well in that environment, like basically mostly locked in one room all day with no other option, repeating the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, not fun.
Yeah, I don't think a 7 is going to thrive there. They would have to find some other way to cope. And so, and just from what you've said, like you don't have like the plan A, B, and C for a good time all the time. The other question I was going to ask is this: when you got married, did you have to take a certain amount of time to like mourn your loss of freedom and like recognize the terror that your marriage induced within you?
That was not on my mind.
Okay, then
that was
actually,
on my mind.
Actually, believe it or not, that's actually kind of common for 7s. Like when they get married, they're very excited, but they're also like, "Oh my gosh, what have I just done?" Like at the loss of possibilities for their life.
Sure.
And they kind of have to like take time to mourn it
because they had to choose something.
They had to commit to something.
Else.
And 7's commitment means loss of freedom.
That is the phrase. I had to choose something rather than everything. That captures 7 so much.
Huh.
Yeah, that's actually that's quotable. Good job.
That's what I'm here for. I'm not just a laugh track.
No, you're not. You're not just a laugh track. You're bringing some wisdom. Yeah. Wow. All right, so I think we can cross 7 off the list. Okay. So now we're at either 9 or 3. The question I always ask first for 3s is this: when you walk into a room full of people, do you almost immediately just kind of have a sense of who you need to be for that room, and then you just kind of become that person for that room? Like you walk in, and in order to be the right person for that room, to portray to them like successfulness or greatness or competency, you know what that is, and you just put on that mask and you go, and that's who you are. Do you feel like you do that?
Yeah, good question. I would definitely say that's, I think, where like the growing up kind of comes in. I feel like that's who I was as a child and like as a kid and even like growing up. But maybe if I had this kind of framework, I would have been able to understand that better as a kid. But I think I was like unintentionally, by, I don't know, society or whatever, like I felt like, wow, this is kind of awkward to be that. Like I felt like that maybe that was my natural tendency, but then it was like, I don't know if this is like, if I want to kind of be on show and be kind of like out there, I kind of feel like a little bit like maybe embarrassed or and I feel like I definitely changed the way I interacted in that kind of a thing. Like, oh, I can see what the person needs to be for the situation. But maybe I'm going to push against that as I got older. Does that make sense?
When you say as a kid, like, can you give me an age range?
Oh, like I think from, so our oldest is 5, and everyone says, oh, he's exactly like you. And he's completely unabashedly outgoing and will act out scenes for you or tell you stories and not stop talking. And
so it's basically like your family saying he's just like you,
right?
And they mean he's just like you
I
were.
was, yeah, at that age.
Yeah.
So like from day one, full of enthusiasm and on show, and will literally take up all the airspace of like. So I think that's kind of how I was, and then maybe
you feel like you've grown into something more nine-ish?
Altered that because I felt like I could see people being like, "Oh, this is intense," or I don't know, because that was a long time ago. But and almost like if I had known, hey, this is a thing, this is like this framework, like this is a 3 or this is a whatever, been like,
as a 5-year-old.
Yeah, as a 5-year-old, because that would have been,
We should start teaching your son the Enneagram now.
Now, definitely. Yeah. I'm going to do that when I get home. But maybe if I had been aware that there was like, kind of, that was okay to be that, then it would have maybe not felt the need to like, ooh, I'm feeling this kind of like cringiness about my personality or something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
But at the same time, maybe I'm just talking, but maybe there's another part of me that was just getting stronger, and that was, those kind of were in tension in some ways. I don't know.
No, I think that you're actually really hitting on something, and I don't want to. I want to talk more about the 9 before I get into this, but there's a thing called soul child theory. Right now, as we're just talking about the 3 and how you felt that way as a child, you're kind of talking right into this idea of soul child theory. But I don't want to say that that's definitely what's going on yet. I want to talk more about the 9 first. Any thoughts, Steve?
This idea that when you were very young, appeared somewhat different than you are now. And who knows what accounts for that shift, right? There are probably like a whole handful of things that play into it, right? We often will cast that as a negative change. Like, I was innocent then, and now this is me not so innocent. But how much less innocent are you when you're 6 than when you're 5? You know what I mean? But the idea of like changing, because part of the theory of the Enneagram, right, is that you sort of develop what we end up calling your personality as a defense against a world that's kind of problematic in ways, right? And so the idea that you would like build up certain patterns of behavior that help you cope or deal with any lack in the world or danger in the world or whatever, that's like at the heart of how the Enneagram views people. So, so I'm interested in this. Not that I mean, it's really hard to explore that stuff because our memories get so clouded and faded, But I am intrigued by this idea that maybe you start off with one pattern and shift into a different one. And then it seems like later in life, there's frequently this thing that happens with us where we try to retrieve some of that earlier energy. Not that we become that again necessarily, but we find a medium. It's almost like maybe you do have this huge personality, and then when you're young, you're so impressionable. You first discover that, oh, maybe that's too much. And you overlearn the lesson. And then eventually you find a way to like balance it out. But when you're so young, you find out like if there's any kind of problem with you at all, if that's how you perceive it, then I mean, that stuff makes huge impacts on us and maybe a bit more than it should. That's all theoretical. That's all speculation here.
Sure.
But that's why I'm not saying anything, because it's all like, I wonder if.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I think well, first of all, I think we should actually use all that you just said. Sure. That's actually really good. So let's explore the 9. tell me again, like you kind of said that the 9, when it was described to you, you felt like that was kind of the conversation going on in your head. Can you be more specific about that?
Yeah, so I can't totally remember all the aspects, but I just remember this guy speaking, and it felt like he was speaking not only directly to me, but it was like explaining how I was feeling inside my head.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, this is really weird. Because
that's normally a good clue.
Yeah.
Did you feel at all like ashamed when you heard it, or like did it hurt to hear it? It
was more just strange because I'd heard him describe one or two of the other ones before, and it was just kind of like whatever. And I knew that when my wife had like taken this test and read about the number, whichever one she was, that it was like she's like reading this to me, and it's like, yes, this is completely you. So, and I hadn't had that moment, but it was like things that he said, like everyone says that you're so laid back and easygoing.
Mm-hmm.
Like you find a lot of energy being outside.
Mm-hmm.
And there were loads more, and I was kind of like furiously writing down because I was just like, wow, this at first it was like, some of these things sort of sound like me, but they don't all sound like me. But then the more he talked, the more it was kind of like giving this picture of like, yeah, this is really describing things.
So here's sort of how we entered into the 9 yesterday. 8s and 9s and 1s have this thing in common where they feel like they're kind of out in the world. And for instance, 5s don't live out here, we live in here, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
The space we
Right up
live
here.
is very different.
Hmm.
And so if you're out in the world, you're kind of vulnerable to it in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Those types tend to feel how out in the world they are, how exposed to the world they are, and they deal with it in different ways. And 9s tend to be very sensitive to power dynamics around them. They tend to be very sensitive to conflict that's going on around them, and they don't like it. Early on, especially if 9s are unhealthy, they'll do what they can to avoid conflict. And so a lot of the patterns that you see where, like you described, being very laid back on the outside, but you don't necessarily feel so laid back on the inside.
Right.
You feel a lot of turmoil because you feel like the world gives you a lot of turmoil. It has enough already. The last thing you want to do is contribute more to the world. And so you develop patterns of behavior and speech that minimize impact on the world. And then later on, as 9s become healthier, they will find strategies that help them absorb chaos from the world, right? You actually find ways to subvert the conflict around you rather than just avoid it. And so 9s are frequently called peacemakers because even if when they're younger and less healthier, they tend to be more conflict avoiders rather than peacemakers. They have a tremendous potential when they find their way of doing it. They have an amazing ability to connect with people on both sides of conflicts and value them above their positions and their interest in the conflict, to communicate to both sides and to do things to expose how ultimately futile and ridiculous conflict can be. Right? 9s have all these abilities to do those things when they figure it out for themselves.
Yeah, interesting.
How's all of that striking you?
Yeah,
so
I think it does. I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I'm still kind of, it's all very new.
Yeah, sure.
And just hearing it, kind of going, okay, that's interesting. And I definitely relate to it.
9s, in my experience, are the hardest to type. They're the last ones to come around and go, yeah, that's definitely what I am. Definitely. And sometimes it takes a long time. I think the major reason for that is what we call the passion of the 9. And by passion, I'm using that in a really old way. It's kind of the point of suffering for the 9. Other people call it core sin, but I don't like some of the import that word has. But the point of suffering for the 9 is self-forgetting, where they kind of lose somewhat of a sense of self. They're out of touch oftentimes with their own desires, their own agenda, and some to some degree, like what the stuff that it is that makes them and unique. Nines are extremely good. Part of what makes them great mediators. Extremely good at understanding other people's perspectives.
Yes.
Nines, unlike anyone else on the Enneagram, can step into someone else's shoes and go, no, I can totally see what it's like to be this person in a way that no one else can. The price they pay for that, though, is that they know what it's like to be everybody else, just not themselves. And so there is kind of this own neglect of self, this way that they call it falling asleep to the self.
Another way to talk about that, because that's the thing with people. We're really complicated, right? And so, like, having multiple ways to talk about it. So, you know the Enneagram symbol, right? The line drawing. Well, that's actually two shapes on top of each other. One's real funky, but then there's just an equilateral triangle in there.
Okay.
And that's the 3, the 9, and the 6. And it's what I was saying earlier about how there's a special connection there with 3, 9, and 6. So let me go real briefly into like what that pattern is like for 9s and see if any of that resonates with you. So those aren't just lines, they're like arrows, right? So any type, when they are under a great amount of stress, will tend to revert to a certain different kind of energy. And they'll look like an unhealthy version of this other thing. They kind of take on some of those characteristics. And then when you're at your best, when you're like the strongest, healthiest version of yourself, you'll tend to take on elements of this other type over here. And so for a 9, when you're at like, well, I'm saying you, but I'm not saying you're a 9. It's the hypothetical you. When a 9 is under a great amount of stress, they'll take on characteristics of like an unhealthy 6.
Okay.
So without getting real deep into 6s, the basic pattern we're looking at there for you is 6s are very aware of the things that can go wrong in the world. At their worst, they can tend to be kind of paralyzed by it, immobile, and they'll want comfort very badly because they know things can go wrong so much, right? And so there's a sense in which the 9 avoidance of conflict can move you into that space where everything is kind of threatening.
Interesting.
And everything's dangerous and demanding and chaotic. And so finding a way to have some kind of peace in this world is really important, right? And there's a way in which 9s can eventually learn how to do that pattern in a healthy way. But early in life, that tends to be an unhealthy thing, right? Like when I am desperate for it, I'll find some way to get some comfort, even if it costs me something, or even if it interrupts my life or makes demands on other people. So when a 9 is moving to their best, they'll tend to take on elements of a healthy 3, right? And for a 9, one of the ways they talk about that, one of the reasons why I'm really interested in what you were saying earlier, is accessing the child heart. Because, I mean, one of the most like beautiful and naive ways to describe a 3 is they really want to please people. They want to be successful, but they can become very easily what other people want them to be. And there's an element of that that's really good for us as individuals and society, right? Even if we have this caricature of it always being wrong. And so it can, they say, be a very positive and healing experience for 9s, having this experience of so much chaos and strife in the world, and being so affected by it, to get in touch with the part of you that is very simple and innocent and just kind of wants to please people and connect with people and make people happy, and to find some success in that. They say that's a really powerful way to like work through a lot of your early issues in life. And of course, you don't become a 3. You don't stop being a 9. You're a 9-ish sort of person, right? But in taking on some of these 3 things, you can be a healthier and more effective version of a 9, right? If any of that is relatable.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it makes, I guess it just makes me more confused.
Yeah.
So
I get that. I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, and the kind of the parts that you were talking about. So I'm guessing that if someone's listening to this, they're thinking about themselves. And when I'm hearing the kind of thinking about a 9 going to a 6, that doesn't necessarily seem like something I would do. But I definitely feel like the whole idea of like the 3 striving for success, and that seems like a really easy thing to do, like as a kid through school and adolescence. Like high school was easy for me, getting good grades. Like sports I was pretty good at, so it was kind of like those kind of things were very easy. But then it was like getting to college still kind of came easy. All of a sudden I was interested in art, and it was like this total mystery, right? Like it was like stepping into a really dark room and you're like, how do you define success in art, or how do you, and you can, like in selling work or degrees or whatever, but that didn't feel like success in art. That felt like success in business or something.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was like,
Yeah.
how are you successful in like internally?
Did you find that the mystery of that, did you find that attractive or imposing?
I found it scary because I feel like, and maybe this is just like because I was good at school, I was used to people saying, this is what you need to do to be successful, and if you do that, you will be. And I could do that really easily. But then it was like, now that there's something that, there's not a clear path of like, you do this and then this is good. It was scary, but it was also like, life is starting, if that makes sense. And so for me, in my own mind, like art is something I'm trying to pursue, but it's kind of like I teach art to middle schoolers that is very separate to this idea of making
Actually
art.
doing your own,
yeah. And so it's kind of like,
part of what I'm hearing here is, first of all, I've never known a 3 who couldn't clearly identify their own goals, their own agenda, and also clearly identify the obstacles in the way of those things. While 9s, that's actually particularly part of their issue, is they have a very hard time identifying, like, what is it that I'm trying to achieve here? And so when you say that you're not actually sure what success looks like in art, that sounds very 9-ish to me.
mm-hmm.
On the other hand, and this is one of the things about the Enneagram, the trouble with finding yourself in it because of all the complicated ways that the things relate to each other. It might be worth exploring, what if you were a 3 and what you're describing in college is the development of a strong 4 wing. And if you were a 3 with a 4 wing, and then that complicates your sense of, like, success has always been very clear, but now it's not, and that's difficult and stressful. And so resonating with the 9 might be 9 as your point of stress in all of that. So that's worth exploring.
I will say, in previous conversations that Andrew and I have had, we've talked about the 4 and how when the 4 was presented to him, it kind of rang hollow.
Well, it's definitely my wife.
Yeah.
That is like clear. So I can see her in that.
Which good to know.
Yeah, it is good to know. It's really helpful to kind of go, oh yeah, this is actually written down in a book before you were born, like, and these things are totally you. It's kind of strange.
Mm-hmm. That might be kind of vexing to her. 4s don't like to be kind of like pegged.
Oh, absolutely.
And so careful with that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No.
4s really need to be a special flower. And that sounds like I'm being insulting, but no, we all kind of have that need to be unique, but they really feel it.
Yeah.
Really
so
feel it.
One of the most terrifying idea to 4s is that there are actually other 4s in the world, and they're not just the only one.
Interesting.
Or
just that anything that they like is trendy. That's the worst fear. It's like, I like something and I've liked it for years, but now it's popular.
And now it's time to switch it all up again.
Yeah, I can't like this anymore.
Yeah, I can't like it anymore.
I absolutely use that to torment our 4 friend.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, I do.
Do we need to pause this? Just spend some time about the ways we've wronged others, especially other fours.
So my question to Steve during the break was that how our parents play into our personality.
Yeah, there's lots of theories about that. I have my own that I've noticed a pattern in the people that I interact with where it seems that parents do tend to leave what I call echoes of their own type, where my wife is a 6, but her mom is a very strong 1. So my wife has echoes of a 1 in her in certain things that she does. It mostly shows up in terms of behavior, not in terms of motivation. And so my first guess when I was kind of typing my wife, my first guess was that she was a 1 because of some of those behaviors. And then when I got deeper and actually talked with her about it, she was like, no, there's no way I'm a 1. And we find out later she's a 6. But I do think that parents do tend to leave echoes of their type on us. My dad is a 9. I'm probably kind of a 9-ish 5.
Okay.
And I do tend to think that it seems to be the same-sex parent when possible, because they tend to be the model.
Yeah.
Like, as a boy, I grew up thinking that I'm supposed to end up like my dad, right? Because everyone just kind of thinks that. My wife grew up, with her mom as her kind of predominant female model.
Sure.
And so there's certain things that my wife does that seem very 1-ish, but she's not a 1.
I was sharing with him how much of an echo of my mom's personality there is in me. Even though it's opposite gender and I didn't model myself after her, because of the kind of impact she had, there is that lingering like shame and condescension and scorn and the 4 stuff in me. And how that echoes there, and I have to keep monitoring it periodically.
So you have like a more of a negative echo than a positive echo.
Yeah, well, it's because of the kind of relationship and how wounding it was. Yeah. And so I think there probably would be more identifiable traces of my dad's personality had it not been overshadowed by this hurricane that happened.
Let me add an asterisk to that portion of my little echo theory. When I'm talking about me and my wife, now that I'm thinking about it, my opposite sex parent, my mom, is actually a 5 like I am. Mandy's opposite sex parent, her dad, is probably a 6 like her. And so now I'm thinking about maybe there is more room for the opposite sex parent to leave echoes, except that, and I've not explored it enough with others to really think about it. For her and I, at least, there's no room for echoes from the opposite sex parent because we are the actual same type. I didn't actually realize that till I was just talking about it. But
maybe that makes more sense with the echo because you are looking at the person that you're not like, and you're getting things from them.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
So I know you don't know the Enneagram super well, but do you have a sense of what your parents are?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
As I was listening to the talk that I had gone to, I was occasionally kind of going, I wonder, but I hadn't kind of figured that out.
Not really landed on anything.
But I was saying before that because my dad's a lawyer, we argued a lot in like a fun way. It wasn't like a yelling argument. It was like debating. Yeah. But it was a lot of that. I found that really, maybe not enjoyable is the right word, but like energizing. There was just a real energy to like this, like my brothers and, family and sitting around and just debating things and just arguing for the sake of arguing a lot, just as kids. And so even though I feel like the need to reconcile differences all the time when people are arguing, I think there's a part of me that finds energy in just taking the opposite side and just arguing for the heck of it.
But see, I wonder if that might actually be a strategy for subverting conflict.
Huh.
Because if you can turn conflict into fun dialogue, you've robbed it of its venom, and you've started the process of actual dialogue, right? If you help someone see the other side of an issue, like these are all like peaceable ways of subverting conflict, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Let me ask you this: when you are in these kind of like play arguments, are you asserting your own point, or are you kind of doing like a debate style? I'm going to assume a position, not necessarily my own, and I'm going to
usually find myself arguing something I don't believe.
See, and to me, as a 9, that's actually pretty natural. Like I said, the 9 can step into someone else's shoes. You can step into someone else's point of view and understand it pretty darn well.
Yeah.
A very common pattern for 9s to be in, if they're in a group where there ends up being conflict, the 9 doesn't want to choose sides. Most people feel forced into one side or the other for various reasons, but 9s really resist that because they don't want the conflict to be there at all. And they're more interested in the people, and they'll connect with both sides. And then both sides of the conflict think the 9 is on their side.
Yeah, interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
When really the 9 is more like they're in a unique position to actually communicate to both sides and to translate. Because they don't have a horse in the race.
Yeah, I guess I've found that you're explaining things and I'm kind of thinking back to like whenever, and like people assuming that I agree with them. And I'm like, why did I never told you that I agree with you. I don't think I've given you any indication that I agree with you, but you for some reason think that I agree with whatever you're saying.
Well, here's the thing. Because 9s, if you're a 9, 9s will tend to not put up a lot of opposition to those things, because they'll show that they're listening. They'll nod, smile,
okay.
I'm listening, and people will take that as agreement.
Yes, that's definitely something that resonates.
Yeah, I'll be honest, we keep saying if he's a 9 and we're waiting for him to call it. I don't know that anything else makes sense at this point.
I'm willing to be surprised. I'd reckon you seem like a 9, but the last thing I want to do is to encourage you to settle into that if it's not right.
Yeah.
Because that could put you on a couple of years of confusing exploration with it, right?
Yeah, sure.
If you were to take that seriously.
Sure.
I'd be much more happy to settle in it if you were the one who was confident about being a 9. But let's continue to explore it. I think there's a reason why we're exploring 9 and not other things. That seems to be what you're resonating with most.
Yeah.
It's just that there are a lot of different ways of being a 9, and that's kind of what we're looking into.
Yeah. And like I said, 9s, they say that like when people go to an Enneagram conference, that there's 2 types that will leave. Almost everyone will go, oh gosh, I am definitely a 1, I'm a 4, I'm a 5. And the only 2 that walk out going, yeah, I'm just not sure, are typically 6s and 9s. 6s need someone else to make the call for them.
Because they really love authority.
Yeah, because of their own stuff. And 9s just kind of have a way of, they've fallen asleep to self. It's harder for them to just identify this stuff on their own for themselves.
Sometimes we use words like fuzziness when we're talking about 9s.
Okay.
It's not that there's nothing there. It's just that part of what the 9's task is to bring themselves into focus a little better.
Yeah. When other people approach 9s, a lot of times what they'll say is, I'm not sure about her. If you ask someone to describe someone who's a 9, oftentimes they'll be like, yeah, they seemed nice, and they have a hard time finding anything definite to say because there's almost like a fuzziness. It's hard to draw them into focus like it is other people.
Because part of
that's part of their strategy on how to get through in life. Even though 9s don't necessarily know that about themselves. Right.
Isn't this whole thing is that you're not doing it on purpose?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's a strategy that you've developed almost unconsciously as you've grown up. And you've actually expressed, you have a certain amount of reflection on how this happened and the decisions that you made about, oh boy, I really need to draw myself back a little bit. I actually wanted to return to that. There's a whole conversation in the Enneagram amongst Enneagram people, I should say,
What do those people look like? Are they?
Yeah,
an awful lot of them are 5s.
Okay, a lot of them are 5s. It's tough to say what they look like. They're very camouflaged. It's hard to notice them.
One of the things that 5s and 9s have in common is we're often on the periphery of situations.
Okay.
Because 9s will tend to avoid conflict and 5s avoid drama, and those overlap quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes when things are happening, we're like murmuring to each other, like, pointing at like, here's what's going wrong.
Yeah, we're always like on the outside of the party, like on the fringes, talking to each other where everyone else is having a great time, and we're observing them having a great time.
So we do a camouflage kind of thing too.
Yeah.
Not by being fuzzy, but by trying to be invisible, not noticeable.
Yeah. Interesting. Huh.
So returning to where you talked about this kind of like something like a 3 in your childhood, and then having, I don't know how conscious it was at the time, but you're able to express like this idea that I need to draw this back. There's a whole conversation in the Enneagram about the messages that we received in childhood that, and whether they were intentionally given messages doesn't really matter. Like this is somehow the idea that we received, and each type has this message that they received, and it's become a very foundational idea that kind of sits in the back of their mind and really informs a lot of what they do. For the 9, one version, and I'm pulling this from Suzanne Stabile, who is part of this ongoing conversation. I want to give credit where credit's due. The message for the 9 is it's not okay to assert myself. The idea there being that I can't have too large of a footprint. It's not okay for me to put myself out there too much.
So when I was a kid, and like literally ever since I can remember, and even now as an adult, Christmas morning, my parents, there was a lot, like, they'd go kind of like crazy with Christmas, but my grandparents would as well, maybe even more so. And so I always found myself stacking my presents in the smallest possible configuration of present stacking so that it didn't look like to my other cousins that I had more presents than them.
Oh,
so I was like literally ever since I can remember, it would be like trying to put it in this very neat little box and as little as possible, because it was like, I hope that they don't think that I have more presents than them, because then I'm going to feel bad. And like, yeah, so it was like, that was just kind of what I always did. Just you saying that just made me think of that.
Wow. So one of the things when 9s look out into the world, we all have, all 9 types, we all have things that we edit into our reality and edit out.
Okay.
Things that are just more clearly in focus for us. One of the things that 9s see very clearly is situations that have potential for conflict. And that's what I hear when you're describing this. Oh, I don't want there to be a conflict. I don't want them to feel bad about the number of presents that I have here. And so I need to go ahead and start like minimizing the potential for conflict now. I'm trying to suck the conflict out of the room before it can even happen. This is like, that's a very 9 thing.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Are there, off the top of your head, other instances? Like, do you see yourself doing that?
Yeah, definitely.
In other ways?
I'm not sure how.
Or do you see that idea of I'm not allowed to assert myself or have too much of an impact? Do you see that message still kind of like showing up in your life in other ways?
Maybe the only thing that comes to my mind is like, and I was going to ask this question as well about just kind of like, could you help to kind of understand the person you are by like the people you read? Like if you looked at authors and you're like, hey, those seem like really certain types of people, but like getting into Wendell Berry and kind of environmentally thinking, hey, I don't want to have a negative impact on the world, and I want to have as small of a kind of a footprint. I want to live in a way that's like sustainable and ecologically friendly. So that's something that I care about. You know, I don't want to put that on my children. So like thinking like, hey, we should have cloth diapers or something so that my kid doesn't feel guilty that they filled up a dump with their nappies or whatever.
That's interesting that the way you phrased it at the end there. You moved it off of you onto them.
Right, because it's like
it's not even your guilt. You're worried about their guilt.
Right, yeah. Because it's like, man, I'd feel bad. You know, like, I guess maybe that's a parent thing of like, but I don't want them to feel like, man, mom and dad, you.
I don't know, not necessarily. Like, I think if I were thinking along those lines, I would probably put my guilt as primary, and maybe their guilt, the potential for their guilt as secondary, because I don't know how they're going to feel someday.
Sure. But
I wonder if, like, as a 9, that's a difference.
I think people might be drawn to the same kinds of reading from all over the place. But if that ends up being a strong pattern, maybe that's a signal, right? And when taken in combination with other things, like if we notice a lot of ways in which minimizing your footprint in the world is like a dominant theme in your life, then yeah, I'd say, you know, that seemed to lean toward 9-ish things. So I think that the things we're drawn to reading, or the kinds of media that we take in, you know, et cetera, how we spend our leisure time, all of those things can be signs. But it's tricky, right?
Sure.
Because what we're trying to dig up what our motivations for those things are, because we can engage in the same activity with very different motivations.
Yeah.
And so everything can be a sign, and not necessarily anything is.
Sure.
Yeah. It always boils down to the motivations.
I wish it were easier to type other people, except I cannot read your motivations.
Yeah.
You know?
It would kind of almost show that the Enneagram is false if it was that easy.
Yeah.
It would be like,
I
man,
agree.
this is too simple.
If it's just about behaviors, it's
Exactly.
false.
I like that it forces us into actually hearing other people.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't share with us your story, then I can't possibly know you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this really showcases how I have to allow each person to be the authority on their own lives.
Interesting.
And I like that, because I'm a person who tries to figure out other people. I'm always trying to figure out.
That's part of what gives 5s comfort.
Yeah.
So it's a huge temptation.
I want to
for us.
know what makes somebody tick, so I know how to work with them. I know whether or not I can trust them and how much. Like, reading people and figuring them out is like, that's my part of my core coping strategy, right? But this forces me out of that. I have to stop trying to figure you out and just explore alongside you and let you make the calls. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like the 9 whole thing, I don't know if it's connected at all, but definitely feels like Merton's another one of those writers, like Thomas Merton, that it's like maybe it's just his writing is like really forcing you to dig into yourself, and maybe that's why. But he's like so revealing as far as like just digging down and kind of like your true self and your false self, and then just yeah.
Incidentally, Merton's whole true self, false self thing, he lives in 4 and 3 space. So that's like his.
Interesting.
That is, I mean, one of the reasons why he develops that
that
spiritual language is because that's his constant struggle.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be authentic? What am I really?
Yeah.
It turns out that that's not something I can hold on to.
Yeah.
I have to release myself in order to be myself. One of the reasons why it looks so convoluted to some of us is because that's how he experiences it. It is that convoluted.
Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
To whatever degree if you are a 9 and you move into 3 space, like, that's going to draw you into that, you know, more focused discussion on who you are, which honestly, that's part of the 9 issue, right? Like 9s, regardless, there are different ways of being a 9, but for all of them, the focus ends up being on getting in touch with something deeper in you that's underlying the kinds of behaviors you're focused on. Like, I'm thinking about my motivations on this level, but there is actually something below that driving it. And if I get in touch with that, I would be more focused on who I am, almost in distinction to the rest of the world, and in distinction to the groups that I serve.
Yeah.
You know, and like focusing in on what defines and drives you a little better, which can feel oddly selfish or something in a way.
No, I was thinking the same thing. It almost feels self-indulgent. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Man, I'm concentrating so much on myself. This is really uncomfortable, and like,
9s have a very hard time focusing on themselves. Yeah.
yeah.
But in doing so, and that's one of the reasons why moving to the 3 is so good, and one of the reasons why Merton might be such a powerful draw in that regard, is because the best thing you can do for the people around you is to be the best version of yourself. And that means being a focused version of yourself, right? And so spending some time clarifying and narrowing your sense of self, that can make you a more effective father, servant, teacher, whatever.
Interesting.
It's very strange to think of self-focused energy as being good for the other, right?
Right,
But
absolutely.
it's like when you're on a plane and they say put your own mask on before you put the mask on for your children, right? It's that kind of thing.
So,
like becoming healthy.
Yeah. Earlier I talked about the message that you end up receiving at some point, and it was that and feel free to edit this message so that means as much as possible to you, but it's something like, it's not okay to assert yourself, right? The message that they say 9s need to then come around and finally receive, this is like what you needed to hear and never did, is your presence matters. It actually matters that you're around. 9s, like I said, they tend to seem fuzzy, almost like they're not here. They tend to put themselves on the fringe of situations, but what they need to learn is that their presence actually does matter. It's not just okay that you're here. It's great that you're here, right? And I don't know if that resounds with you right now, but I think it tags along with what we are just talking about. Is focusing on yourself is actually a really great idea. Understanding your own agenda and goals and desires, and not just setting them aside for other people's is. Developing your own point of view and not just understanding others is really is really important. And that's kind of the growth that a 9 would be looking for.
It makes me wonder, because you have talked so much about minimizing your input or minimizing your impact, your footprint, right? Not leaving a negative effect on the world, but what positive effect on the world might you leave?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely like, I feel like it's probably, it's like a cliche thing to think like my children give me like purpose, but I definitely feel like if I hadn't had kids, I'd be like, man, what am I going to do now? You know, like I've been to every cafe, like, like what's next?
So those were your goals before kids?
No, they weren't
visiting
my
as many
goals.
cafes as possible?
But I just ended up there. It's like, man, I'm at another cafe. I'm sitting on another seat that's uncomfortable, leaning down onto a crate that's supposed to be a table or, whatever. But definitely having children is by far the hardest thing. And very rewarding.
But even then, I'm going to push back on that. That's still, you're trying to have an impact through someone else. And not that that's not important. You want to have an impact on them and then them leave a positive impact.
Sure.
But at some point, somewhere along that chain, someone has to decide what that impact actually is.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So aside from anybody else,
is the impact?
what is your positive impact?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And I think you don't necessarily need to answer it.
Right.
I mean, it strikes me that you actually have a very easy answer in front of you that we've talked about, and yet you're having trouble. Like, why couldn't you just go, I teach a bunch of 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds, and hopefully I'm having a positive impact on them every day as I'm helping them explore the powers of their imaginations. And yet you couldn't quite pull that into focus.
That is true. Like, I guess I've taught high schoolers and then middle schoolers for, 10 years now. And
our rooms are right next to each other. And what I teach is a what's called college and career readiness. And so I talk a lot with kids about what their careers are. And they have you for a quarter, and they have me for a quarter at some point during the year. At least all the fifth graders do. I've come back to you several times with kids who, after they've had your class, are in my class, saying, "I want to be an art teacher. I really love to be an art teacher someday." And so there is this very tangible kind of sense of impact, at least at this point. Who knows if they'll become art teachers someday.
Right.
But at least you're having an effect on several kids.
And of course, that's the obvious tip of the iceberg, right? Like, let's start with the fact that you're a teacher, and that's everyone's gold standard for having an impact on the world, right? But move beyond that to the fact that, you know, like, if you spend time with friends, you affect their lives in ways that are really difficult to quantify, but powerful. And to whatever degree 9 makes sense to you, the power of 9s to subvert conflict, to absorb the poison of conflict. Man, like, there's so much tremendous potential in that. But of course, that's something that comes through, you know, focus in on who I am and what's going on in the world around me and how do I connect with this. And that's a whole lifelong journey, you know?
Yeah.
But what a cool thing to explore. You've got an easy place to start in that, at least I'm a teacher.
Yeah. And then let me throw one more thing on this dog pile. I feel like we're just throwing thing after thing on you.
Sure.
We've talked a lot about you being an art teacher, but we've also talked a little bit about you being an artist.
Right.
What's the potential for impact through your art?
I guess that's the kind of like secret goal that. Yeah, definitely. Like,
why is that goal a secret?
Well, I guess it's because it's so hard to quantify for myself, like, and then it's just so, I don't know, like, it's such a hazy thing to, like, to make something that someone else is going to resonate with and that it could impact them. And so there's a lot of kind of like just unsure, you know, like I make a painting, I think it's awesome, and then like 3 days later I see it and I'm like, that is so crap, and I never want to look at it again. And then if I see it, like, so there's some drawings that I put up at a cafe 2009, and they literally gone in a box because they were so big that I didn't have any space to put them up anywhere. It was like, oh yeah, those were pretty cool, and I just kind of forgot about them, and then also discounted them because I'd done a lot since then, and I'd done a master's, and a lot of that stuff you do before you do your master's, you're like, man, that was really trite, or that was really forced or contrived or whatever. For me, or maybe as an artist, you think the stuff I'm doing now, like, that's good, like everything else, whatever. But then you kind of look back and you're like, yeah, it's actually pretty good. But then there's the other fact that it all sits in boxes in my house, and you're kind of like, this isn't impacting anyone, and I'd love to sell it to someone to make some money off of it, but who's gonna buy it? So you're just kind of like,
so
I don't want to think about it.
Let me throw in real quick. The major temptation for a 9 is self-deprecation.
Okay.
Putting oneself down.
Okay.
Minimizing themselves and bringing others up.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense.
I just heard a whole bunch of that where you even said you'll paint something and it's maybe 3 days before you go, oh, this is garbage.
Yeah.
And then everything you said about all your old work, you described how you you're just ready to put it. Oh yeah, that was before I did my master's. It's really not any good. And how it sounds like eventually all of your art is garbage to you.
Well, no, and then if it's long enough away, it feels like someone else made it, and you're like, hey, that's actually kind of cool. Oh. And then someone.
And so you have to think of yourself as someone else before you can think it's good again.
It sort of reveals the silliness of the self-deprecation, right? Like, if I'm not feeling so attached to it, I can actually appreciate it better.
Right? Absolutely.
So it doesn't even have to be active self-deprecation, because for 9s, it's just like they could be tremendously productive and just not put themselves out there, right? So you have all this great
Emily
work.
Dickinson or something.
Exactly that. You have all this great work, but and you might like to sell it, but that would require making a footprint in the world. That would require putting yourself out. And that's tricky. It's much safer, it's much more comfortable to trust that you're making an impact on the world by teaching, by serving a group. Rather than to believe in your own work as being a worthy contribution in its own right.
And can you see how the way you're thinking about your own work, you say you have a hard time figuring out, like, okay, what is the goal here? What does success look like? Well, no matter what you're settled on, you're already subverting it in the way that you think about everything you do. You say, well, maybe it is to sell as many as possible, or maybe it is to have some other kind of like impact, but it doesn't even take 3 days before whatever you make you think is garbage. Like you're already subverting it before you could ever even formulate a goal. No wonder it's hard to figure out a goal.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We're kind of beating up on you right now. How do you feel?
Yeah, that's good.
Good.
Beating up in the sense that we're like, man, you're so awesome.
you're so awesome.
How could you make a more awesome impact on the world?
Isn't that what, like, is that maybe the best way to really beat up an nine, is just tell them how awesome they are, force them to recognize it? No,
you're like,
stop,
no, guys, seriously,
stop.
just stop.
This hurts too much.
Well, that's the thing. It's the invitation to your best self is always an invitation to the thing you're avoiding.
Oh, interesting.
We're just going to sit with that for a moment.
Which is going to the 3 space, right?
Yep.
What does it mean to rediscover the child who's just like, I made this thing, isn't it awesome?
The child who believes their presence matters.
Can you find the innocence in it again?
Yeah. The child who's willing to assert themselves, willing to have a voice and show up in a big way, right? And boy, you already have an avenue for that. Through art. Maybe just showing up in a big way and asserting yourself through art.
So anyway, it will be easy for us to keep drawing at this and picking at it.
Yeah.
But that's probably not going to be helpful if we do too much more of that.
I agree.
I guess I'm just curious, after all of that, and it really is a very positive beatdown that we just gave you, right? Like,
right.
Where are you at with that?
Yeah, it definitely helps kind of clarify things. And it's interesting when you see like patterns of behavior that you didn't realize were patterns of behavior. Kind of like, oh, I thought I was just living. And you're like, oh, I keep doing kind of the same. Yeah.
The unintentional coping strategies.
Sure, yeah.
This is work. This has gotten me by.
The consistent minimizing of self.
Right. And for me, I guess, like, yeah, it is really interesting. I guess I just have to think about it for a few weeks.
And so, and at some point we'll have you back on to see how that's kind of opened things up for you. Yeah.
The homework's going to come from, as you're processing this, every bit that you process is like a challenge to yourself, and you'll have to tell us what those challenges are.
Yeah.
Because it would be easy for us to say, dude, totally show your art, except how ham-fisted is that? I don't know what's good for you.
Right.
But you can tell us, here's where I'm being challenged. Here's the new growth.
I think the one thing that I would add to everything we've just talked about is the challenge to, as you see these things occur. Now I feel like we've kind of opened your eyes to this pattern. The way I'm phrasing it, you'll have to come up with your own, is self-minimization, of always trying to make yourself lesser. One thing you need to learn to do is, as you see that, don't be too hard on yourself. You need to learn to see it in a very non-judgmental way. In fact, I think it's best to just kind of have a humor about it. Like, oh my gosh, can you believe how, like, to what ridiculous lengths am I going
There I
to
go
try
again.
and minimize myself? It's just it's crazy.
Here's me being my cartoon self.
Yeah. Learn to see it, because it really is like, it's just crazy and ridiculous. The lengths we go to. Learn to laugh at it, because if you are judgmental about it, it'll actually compound it. You have to learn to just kind of not judgmentally go, oh my gosh, I did it again. I can't believe it. Oh, seriously. It'll steal the power from it. And as it loses power, you'll gain freedom from it. I hope that made at least a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
But as you start doing it, it will make more sense.
Okay.
Learn to see your compulsions, and when you are stuck in your compulsions, and learn to laugh at it as you see it. Is, I guess, if I could put it in a pithy way.
My only offering, as it seems like we're kind of coming to a close.
Yeah.
You know, my only offering is like a parting gift rather than as a challenge is, to whatever degree the patterns we're pulling out are valid. The things that you're doing as coping are brilliant and beautiful things, right? If you're minimizing your own work and emphasizing having an effect on the world through your kids, through your students, like, that's still so beautiful and good.
Yeah.
There's no reason to minimize that or think that that's problematic, you know? It's just that it's okay for you to totally value your own work in addition to all of that.
I've never thought of that before.
It's an invitation to balance yourself out.
Uh-huh.
You're doing some beautiful things, but you're doing it not as your whole self yet. And so we're trying to help you move into your whole self, which will mean doing some other beautiful things too. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Well, Andrew, thanks for being on our podcast.
Thanks.
This has been really fun.
I feel like
for us.
I feel like I've learned so much about you,
Uh-huh.
and so much about what it means to be a 9. Man, you've given me so much to think about.
Yeah, thanks.
It'll be great to see you in a couple months.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Thanks.